Welcome to Weathering Minds, where we discuss how the weather outside affects the weather inside your mind. I'm your host, Daisy Whittington, and today we are going to be analyzing the psychological effects of weather changes during COVID 19 and the pandemic. So join us as we explore how lockdowns, remote work, and limited outdoor activities have influenced mental health. Now, I know what you're thinking. Daisy, the pandemic was what, at this point, 4 years ago? It's 2024. True, but I feel like this is a really interesting topic that is not discussed, and I thought it would just be a good, interesting episode to do. So we're going to kind of dive into really three things in this episode. One, how genuine weather changes affected COVID as a virus and its transmission. Two, how did the effects of COVID affect mental health? And three, how people resolved their issues that they were feeling specifically with mental health, and how we can apply these to mental health issues specifically related to weather today. So let's get into it. So as I said, the first thing we're going to look into today is how weather, meteorology, affected spread and transmission and actual biological factors of COVID. So the effect of weather on the spread of COVID is one of the most investigated research questions since the onset of the pandemic. It's a really, from the research I looked into, I looked at about 15 research papers on this specific subject. And it's actually an interesting topic because there's not any true conclusions that can be made. There's some really interesting research on how it did affect the transmission, which we're going to focus on more of that today. But there's not any true confirmations that this is a real scientifically proven thing or theory. But let's get into what I read. So in general, with any type of disease, climatic factors can influence disease dynamics, especially in tropical regions with rapid temperature changes. So yeah, any rapid temperature changes, and this doesn't mean, I feel like some people might think temperature changes means Florida because it's raining and then sunny. No, it's when actual temperatures are dropping, rising, because that can really influence the spread of a disease. And this can be proven because wind speed and atmospheric pressure have had a positive linear relationship with COVID-19. And what that means is there's been a pattern that shows when wind speed and atmospheric pressure increase, so does COVID transmission decrease, so does COVID. So that's what they mean by a positive linear relationship. So what's interesting about this is I don't know the exact answers to, temperature, high temperature, this reduces COVID. I don't know, I apologize, I don't know the exact specific scientific things. However, it can be proven because there's been tons and tons of research data that have shown in these more densely populated, which can sometimes attribute to higher temperatures, these more densely populated, hotter areas are spreading COVID in a much slower way, which is just interesting. And at first people thought, okay, so it's just the population density, but logically speaking, shouldn't that place be transmitting faster? No. So this is because of how high the temperatures are. For some reason, the higher the temperature, the harder for the virus is to spread, and it kind of restricts its mobility. So in this specific study I looked into for this episode, and this one had a lot of concurring opinions with multiple other case studies. I did read a lot, like I said, but I didn't want to tell y'all about one case study I thought would be interesting with no other backup evidence. So this one did have a lot of evidence. It said there was no evidence of a nonlinear relationship between temperature and transmission rate in the current sample. And so that's kind of what I was saying about the wind speed one earlier. When it says no evidence of a nonlinear relationship, that's basically fancy wording for saying it does have a linear relationship, temperature and transmission rate. So similar to wind speed in COVID transmission, it's like that with temperature. So the higher the temperature, the more it will decrease, and the lower the temperature, the more it will increase. What's interesting is these things like temperature, wind speed, etc. are scientifically proven to have had a impact on COVID transmission. But weather conditions like UV, precipitation, etc., they have not had enough research done to prove that they are a big factor in COVID transmission, which is just interesting because all these other parts of meteorology and weather forecasting, etc., have had a big impact on COVID transmission. And as I had said earlier, with the hotter the temperature, the more it will decrease. As temperatures drop in the winter, COVID transmission might possibly speed up. And if these things are true, we need to have some dynamic government policies. There should have been, I guess, past tense, some government policies to mitigate this transmission, and policies that can adapt to what this weather is, because it's not all just politics. There's obviously some science involved. So if our government got involved, maybe there could have been some changes in like the dealing of COVID. So that's the first part of the episode. How did weather affect the spread of COVID? Let's get into the more mental health side of Weathering Minds. And I came up with a research question for this part because I just felt like it kind of helps guide the conversation. And that is, to what extent did the effects of COVID-19 affect mental health through the lens of weather changes? And what I mean by that is, how did COVID affect mental health, and how can we basically relate this to meteorology and weather? Because that's what this episode is on. That's what this channel and podcast is on. So first, let's get into the two main things that kind of led to big mental health issues during the pandemic: lockdowns and remote/online work, or no work at all. So lockdowns. Studies reported increased levels of psychological distress and symptoms of depression and anxiety compared to pre-pandemic levels when surveying people with lockdowns. Why? Well, lockdown restrictions affected social connection, which could lead to the feelings of increased social isolation, social loneliness, which are associated with increased psychological distress. So when we are being locked down, some of us were locked down alone, some of us were locked to family, but specifically people who are alone, you tend to feel just lonely, I guess, increased social isolation. So when we had no one to connect with, unless it was on Zoom or for work, which we'll get into, people were feeling stressed and anxious and depressed because there's just less for them to focus on, except for the fact that they're alone. And this exacerbated existing chronic mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, PTSD, substance misuse. So there was kind of two main people who started to have these things during the pandemic, and people who already had anxiety or depression or whatever, and it just heightened and heightened and heightened during the pandemic. So lockdown was definitely something that really affected COVID. Remote work was also something that really affected COVID. And what I mean by that is like online working from home. And I mean, you can put in there unemployment. So I feel like the mental health risks were very well broadcasted for public facing workers. And what I mean by that is healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, people who had to continue working in the pandemic. I remember, and I was only in I think 6th grade when COVID started. I still remember the news articles they would do on nurses during the pandemic. So I feel like those mental health risks were really well recognized, but the impacts on those working from home were less clear and less talked about, because workers at home were experiencing some complex mental health impacts despite these generally low risk situations, which I think shows that you don't need to be in danger of your life to have these really just complex feelings, because research has shown that more workers anticipate negative impacts while returning to in-person work due to these COVID-19 safety concerns. And telework during the pandemic was associated with increases in social isolation, and work stress, family conflict, distractions, and increased food and alcohol consumption. And this kind of relates back to the whole lockdown thing, is that they have less to focus on. So they're going to focus more on their family and the conflicts. They're going to focus more on alcohol, and they're going to feel more work stress, because what else are you thinking about? So that was kind of, those two things were really negative mental health impacts of COVID. One positive impact that I don't think is talked about really at all, and I actually have a personal testimony to this, is there was a lot of increased outdoor activity. Many fitness, recreation, and other social opportunities moved outdoors during the pandemic in 2020. And this really interesting statistic shows that approximately 7.1 million more Americans enjoyed outdoor activities in 2020 than the year before. And research shows that people who maintained outdoor activity during the pandemic reported better psychological health outcomes than those who did not go outside. And I can totally testify to this. I remember when I was in the pandemic, me and my family would sit outside all day on our lawn. We would have the lawn chairs and just like enjoy each other's company. And I never used to go outside that much before COVID. So I feel like that's definitely true that people learn to enjoy the outdoors more, and it is been proven by many, many mental health experts that being outdoors can help increase your mental health, not increase your mental health, but you know what I mean, reduce anxiety, reduce depression. So this was one positive impact of COVID. However, I think we can all assume that, but when it comes to the research data, certain patterns of like the outdoor recreation and its association with mental health during the pandemic could be due to demographic differences. Not every age had the same opportunities, like, or whatever, you know, people of different ages couldn't all be outside, whether you're a senior, you're a baby. So they had said that the average demographic for all these research things was like 20 to 30. So really not a big margin or range at all, which kind of makes the data not as accurate, but I definitely would agree that being outdoors definitely helped during the pandemic. So the last thing we're going to get into today is coping strategies and how we can learn from that era and apply it to today. So since mental health problems were just like a really common and not disgusting, I feel like it just became a lot more normalized during COVID, self-care tips were some very common solutions people took. And while these were helpful during lockdown, these can also be applied to common mental health issues today, such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And that's kind of why I'm making this episode, because I thought it would be interesting because there's a lot of interesting weather data on COVID and its transmission, but there's also a lot of great mental health lessons we can take from it. So let's get into some solutions that were used during the pandemic. So number one is taking care of your body. And I have 4 main things for this under like the subtitle of taking care of your body. Is number one, get the right amount of sleep. Having an organized sleep schedule, that meaning you can go to bed and get up at similar times every day, can help you avoid sleep problems. And I swear by this. I go to bed at one time every night on a school night, and I wake up the exact same time the next day. And let me tell you, it helps improve just like your sense of like accomplishment and well-being when you set a plan to get up at a certain time of the day, and you just feel a lot more refreshed. So I totally agree. Get the right amount of sleep. Move your body. Regular physical activity and exercise has been proven to help reduce anxiety and improve moods. Choose healthy food and drink. Foods that are high in nutrients such as protein, vitamins, and minerals are healthy choices. And avoid food and drink with added sugar, fat, or salt. And also avoid tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. I feel like this is kind of like an obvious one, but using alcohol to manage how you feel can just make matters worse and reduce your coping skills for when you won't have access to alcohol or drugs. And definitely avoid taking legal drugs or misusing prescriptions to help manage your feelings, because as I said, it's just going to reduce your coping skills and it's just not healthy. So that's number one, taking care of your body. Number two, there's really only 2 main ones for today, is taking care of your mind. So I have 2 for this. Relax and recharge. Many people benefit from relaxation exercises such as mindfulness, deep breathing, meditation, and yoga. This can help manage stress and help you relax. And I actually do, again, have like kind of a personal testimony to this, because I really started to get into this during COVID with 2 main things. And this is not sponsored at all. The Calm app and ASMR on YouTube. So if you don't know what ASMR is, it's like relaxing videos, I'd say, but they really help you with mindfulness, getting a good night's sleep, and just relaxing. And those really helped me during the pandemic. And also the Calm app, which is just a bunch of meditations and deep breathing and etc. So things like that, or any mindfulness app, can be really helpful and just like helping you relax and recharge and just like relax. And number 2 is staying in touch and connecting with others. So family, friends, and community are all parts of having a healthy mental outlook. And if you all come together to form like a healthy support system, there will always be someone there to help address your concerns or challenges and have you not be alone. And on that note, I think that's mainly what we're going to talk about today. This was a really interesting episode for me to do because I really liked how I got to go into weather and meteorology stuff and also mental health. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what you want to hear next. And thank you so much for watching Weatherly Nines. This is Daisy Whittington signing off.